Good happy Sunday afternoon, July 18, 2021. I'm Riley King, and welcome to the Sunday afternoon edition of This Week with Riley King. Let's get started right now. We have a lot of political coverage to get to, so let's begin right now. First step, the U.S. is likely undercounting the number of new COVID cases fueled by the Delta variant to the extent that a lot of infections are occurring in young people. They're probably not presenting to get tested. Let's take a listen to that video from CBS Face the Nation.
We just talked to the mayor there of Springfield, Missouri, who sent the message to other communities, it's coming. It just reminds me of the original days of this pandemic where the numbers kind of caught up to where reality was. Do we have a handle really on the Delta variant and how it's spreading and how much of it there is in the community?
Well, we're seeing a decoupling between cases and hospitalizations and deaths, and I think that's likely to persist. England is seeing that as well, and they're further ahead in terms of their Delta epidemic than us, and that's because more of the vulnerable population has been vaccinated. I think at this point we're probably undercounting how many infections there are in the United States right now, because to the extent that a lot of the infections are occurring in younger and healthier people who might be getting mild illness, they're probably not presenting to get tested. And to the extent that there are some breakthrough cases, either asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic cases in those who've been vaccinated, they're not presenting to get tested, because if you've been vaccinated, you don't think that you have the coronavirus, even if you develop a mild illness. And we're not doing a lot of routine screening right now. Unless you work for the New York Yankees, you're not getting tested on a regular basis. So I think that this Delta wave could be far more advanced than what we're detecting right now, and our ascertainment, the number of cases we're actually picking up, could be lower. At the peak of the epidemic in the wintertime, we were probably turning over 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 infections. In the summer wave of last summer, we were probably picking up more like 1 in 10 infections. We might be picking up something on the order of 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 infections right now, because more of those infections are occurring in people who either won't present for testing or they're mild infections and they're self-limiting. So the people who tend to be getting tested right now are people who are getting very sick, or people who are developing telltale symptoms of COVID, like loss of taste or smell. And that's only about 15 or 20% of people who will become infected.
Okay, and there you go on that video.
House Intelligence Committee, and it's
Rep. Adam Schiff, a Democrat from California, says the January 6th committee will go forward with or without GOP members. Rep. Adam Schiff, we hope that McCarthy will appoint people who are. Let's take a listen to that video from MSNBC and NBC News.
Adam Schiff. He chairs the House Intelligence Committee and is also now a member of the Select Committee investigating January 6th. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for being here with us to talk about this incredibly important investigation. I'd like to start with all of the new revelations that have come out over the course of the last week or so as we're learning more from in the public record. I'm sure that there are things that are already, that you already know that were classified, but now many of us are learning for the first time. But I'm interested to know what of those revelations, and we talked a lot particularly about General Milley, and I know you said he should definitely testify. Was there anything about what occurred that stood out to you that you want to make sure that the committee pursues in depth as you get started?
Well, first of all, I can confirm that we will miss you. So all the best to you in your new venture.
Thank you.
But what I've said about General Milley is that he's certainly someone that we should consider. We haven't made any decisions yet on witnesses apart from our first hearing, which you're reporter is quite accurate. We intend to go forward whether McCarthy appoints people or he doesn't. We do have 7 Democrats, 1 Republican who have been named by the Speaker, so it's already bipartisan. And of course, we hope that McCarthy will appoint people who are serious about the task. But I suspect his decision will be driven by whatever Donald Trump wants. But in terms of the allegations in the books that are coming out about General Milley and others, we want to find out what went on in the run-up to January 6th. We want to find out what happened on January 6th. We want to know what was going on in the White House and the administration. If there were discussions about how to overturn the election or retain power by any means, obviously that's going to be pertinent to our inquiry. Nothing would surprise me at this point. The idea that the president may have been willing to use troops to try to put down protests or overturn the results, we really can't say that anything is done in contemplation of that former president.
Okay, and there you go on that video and that report. A lot of these bills are rooted in racism. Martha Raddatz is on the ground in Pennsylvania, a 2020 battleground state, looking into the debate on election reform that some critics call voter suppression. Let's take a listen to that video from ABC News.
Biden and Mitch McConnell.
The assault on free and fair elections is just such a threat, literally. I've said it before. We're facing the most significant test of our democracy since the Civil War.
That mainstream state laws are more dangerous than 2 world wars, more dangerous than poll tests and Bull Connor and actual Jim Crow segregation, and somehow analogous to the Civil War? What utter nonsense.
President Biden and Mitch McConnell on the latest political flashpoint, voting rights, as Republican state lawmakers across the country push new restrictions in the name of election integrity, critics calling it voter suppression. This week, Texas House Democrats fled the state in a last-ditch effort to block a voting restrictions bill. I sat down with one of those lawmakers and traveled to battleground Pennsylvania to look at the debate shaping the future of America's elections. From Texas to Georgia, Arizona to Alabama, the fight over voting rights is intensifying. All across the nation, Republican state lawmakers proposing or passing legislation that critics say makes it more difficult for Americans to vote, including requiring uniform IDs, restricting ballot drop boxes, and even trying to prohibit people from passing out water to those waiting in line to vote. Here in Pennsylvania, a battleground state in 2020, the issue of election reform is white hot after widespread claims of election fraud. Claims that are unfounded, with no evidence the election outcome would change. But Republican State Senator David Argall is charging ahead anyway, with hopes of more restrictions. If you have a more restrictive time when you can vote, or making it harder to send in a mail-in ballot, if you have a job that you can't leave in the middle of the day, that you can't vote until late at night, that you need to apply to vote way earlier than some people, what's the matter with that?
I think our goal, and you've heard it in other states as well, is to make it easier to vote, but harder to cheat. And so I really, really push back hard with those folks that think that, this is some kind of a threat to democracy. I think it's never been easier to vote in Pennsylvania than it is today. We just want to make sure it's done right.
Kendra Cochran, an activist fighting for voting rights, says the move to restrict voters is an obvious effort to target minority communities who help put Democrats over the top in this state.
I feel like this is a retaliation for us showing up last year. They want to discourage the folks. They want to make sure that we don't have the same result that we did. A lot of these bills are rooted in racism, if we just want to call it out.
In Texas, Republicans proposed a ban on 24-hour voting, drive-through voting, and mailing absentee ballot applications to all eligible voters. Measures, they argue, were only enacted as emergency procedures during the COVID pandemic. To block it, Texas Democrats, including Trey Martinez Fisher, walked out of the state legislature and headed to D.C. to break quorum.
This is a suppression session to suppress the voices of voters, and we knew that if we weren't bold and defiant, if we didn't have the courage to walk away and use the rules that are in our Texas Constitution, they would run us over.
Which they will likely still do as they come up with new bills and new restrictions. And not just in Texas, the ACLU tracking more restrictions every day.
This isn't a partisan issue. So we want voting to be more convenient. We want voting to be easier. We want as many eligible Americans as possible to be able to vote. So I don't think I understand what problem we're trying to solve. There is the theoretical concern about voter fraud, but there's scant evidence that that has actually been an issue.
But with fears growing with Democrats that local efforts will fail to stop restrictions, many are turning to federal voting rights legislation that is on an even shakier footing.
Okay, and there you go on that video in that report. As President Biden approaches 6 months in office, the 538's Nate Sullivan weighs in on whether or not he buys the president's current approval rating as a bellwether for Democrats come the midterms. Let's take a listen to that video in that report from ABC News.
Biden's approval rating.
President Biden's inaugural address 6 months ago this week. He called for unity, promised to be a president for all Americans. Now, as he marks half a year in office, how does his popularity compare to other modern presidents at this point in their terms? And what might that mean for Democrats' narrow majorities in Congress? 538's Nate Silver analyzes.
As he approaches a half year in office, President Biden's approval rating is good, but not great. Biden's approval rating is around 51%, according to our 538 average. By contrast, his disapproval rating is around 42%. That might seem good, and in fact, it's higher than President Trump ever achieved, but it's not particularly high by historical standards. At this point in their terms, Barack Obama was at 55%, for example, while LBJ was at a lofty 75%. Biden is doing better than Bill Clinton and Gerald Ford, and about as well as George W. Bush, but overall, he's in the lower to middle end of the historical range. Now, if Biden were to hold at 51%, Democrats would have a decent chance to retain the Senate and the House next November. But historically, Biden has two big problems. Number one, approval ratings tend to trend down after the first 6 months. And number two, the president's party usually loses seats at the midterms. Obama, for instance, fell to 45% by November 2010, and that resulted in a 63-seat loss for Democrats. Meanwhile, Ronald Reagan dropped from 58% to 42%, and Jimmy Carter from 62% to 49% before their parties faced midterm losses. And while a recent Gallup poll found that a record number of Americans described themselves as thriving as life ultimately returns to normal, it's easy enough to see the challenges Biden faces, ranging from rising homicide rates to rising inflation to the Delta variant. We're going to talk a lot about the midterms on this segment. I don't think you should regard any outcome as inevitable. But no, I don't buy that Biden's approval rating at this early stage should give Democrats much cause for comfort.
Okay, and there you go on that video and that report. I'm deeply concerned. Surgeon General Dr. Viensky tells Martha Raddatz there isn't enough focus on children under 12 who aren't eligible to get the COVID-19 vaccine, saying our kids depend on us and depend on us. Let's take a listen to this video and this report from ABC News.
He says, come down.
The World Health Organization warned that with the Delta variant and the 3 other variants of concern still circulating, the pandemic's really nowhere near finished, and new, possibly more dangerous variants could emerge. If we don't get this under control now, what do you anticipate the fall looking like?
Well, Martha, I am deeply concerned. We've made so much progress over this past year, and seeing how many people have gotten vaccinated, seeing cases come down so markedly from their January peak, that's been really reassuring. And knowing that the vast majority of people who are fully vaccinated have a high degree of protection, that also gives me some comfort. But what I worry about, Martha, is that we still have millions of people in our country who are not vaccinated. We have to still protect our children under 12 who don't have a vaccine available to them. And I want to focus on the kids for a moment here, because this is such an important point we don't talk about enough. For our children under 12, and I say that as a dad who's got 2 kids who are 4 and 3 and who don't have a vaccine available to them yet, our kids depend on us, the people around them, being protected, being vaccinated in order to shield them from the virus. And that's why, again, it's so important for us to get vaccinated. I'm worried that what we're starting to see increasingly in states like Arkansas and Missouri and Nevada and my home state of Florida and Louisiana, these surges within the unvaccinated population, that we will continue to see that unless we get a hold of this pandemic by getting more people vaccinated.
Okay, and there you go on that video and that report. And that does it for this Sunday afternoon edition of This Week with Riley King. Thank you for watching. Have a great rest of your Sunday. And I'll see you back here next Sunday for another edition of This Week with Riley King. And have a great week ahead of you as well. Goodbye.